So we have a fantastic lineup of speakers for this panel. So from your left to right, Rohit Chopra has led US government agencies at the center of regulating technology, personal data, and financial services. He was nominated by President Biden to serve as director of US Consumer Financial Protection Bureau from 2021 to 25. He was nominated by President Trump to serve as a commissioner of the US Federal Trade Commission from 2018 to 2021. He's widely recognized for his work to regulate novel uses of data and AI to address illegal discrimination, surveillance, fraud, and anti-competitive conduct. Holds a BA from Harvard and an MBA from the Wharton School. Next, we have Yannis Ioannidis, who is the president of the Association for Computing Machinery, ACM. He is a professor at the Department of Informatics and Telecommunications of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, as well as the past president and general director and associated faculty at the Athena Research and Innovation Center. His research spans data science, data analytics, data infrastructures, and more. His work is inspired by data management analysis problems that arise in industrial environments. He has created numerous spin-off companies and involved in several big public research infrastructure projects. Next, we have AJung, who is an associate professor at McGill University and a member of Mila. She's a roboticist by training, and she directs the RAISE lab, where she looks at the intersection between robot ethics, human-robot interaction, and responsible AI. Her team is investigating how meaningful accountability can be enabled in the design of AI systems, why AI-powered robotics presents fundamentally different sets of challenges than what is often discussed in AI ethics. And she's previously served as a senior advisor for the UN Secretary-General's high-level panel on digital cooperation and CEO of an AI ethics company and founder of Canadian nonprofit, the Open Roboethics Institute. Next, Brent Hecht is, let me just get the bio. There we are. Partner, Director of Applied Science at Microsoft and an affiliate associate professor at Northwestern University. Dr. Hecht has been doing award-winning human-centered artificial intelligence research for over 15 years, has done early work on algorithmic bias, on things like data strikes, data dividends, data leverage, and is a recipient of a career award from the NSF, was on the founding executive committee of this very conference, and his work has been featured by many different established media outlets. And then finally, last but not least, Sorelle Friedler is the Shubalal Family Professor of Computer Science at Haverford College and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. She served as the Assistant Director for Data and Democracy in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy under the Biden-Harris administration, where she co-authored the AI Bill of Rights and contributed to policy on federal use of AI. Her research focuses on the fairness and interpretability of machine learning, including lots of really important papers in disparate impact, socio-technical, fair ML, and auditing methods, and was a co-founder of FACT and is currently on the executive committee. Without further ado, let's move on to our first question. So this is a general question to the entire panel. How are ongoing developments around AI policy reshaping expectations and possibilities for responsible AI? And I'm going to go first to Brent.
Sure. So reflecting on this question, I was having an email chain with several of the other original leadership of the FACT conference, and the discussion was whether or not we're winning as a community. And I think you might see some signals of that email conversation throughout the conference, from Suresh's keynote and these types of things. And my answer to that is the developments that have occurred, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, have created a situation where I think we're losing, and we are losing pretty badly. The reasons for that are outside of the community, but that is our lot, and it is our responsibility to do something about it. Losing is very important. It is very important that we're losing. It means that there's a bunch of new harms that are not being mitigated. It means there are a bunch of new harms that are not being understood. It means there are opportunities that are not being taken advantage of and opportunities that are not well understood. That sounds very pessimistic, but I am actually quite optimistic from my perspective as a facilitator of this community early on, as well as my role in industry, where I lead a whole bunch of different research projects in our sphere of influence. So the reasons I'm optimistic are, one, talent and energy. This community has never been short of it, and I definitely see that this year too. Two, and I think those of you who work in industry will definitely agree with me, there is an unmet need for a voice to help steer the AI paradigm in a different direction that is widely felt across many of my peers in the industry and will be widely welcomed. And then third, the new developments, Reuben, that you were talking about, create a bunch of new possibilities. And so I would say, to take advantage of all of those three things, I would posit a couple changes that we need to make as a community, particularly new research questions and new tactics. So with respect to new research questions, you folks should be leading the discussion on AI and job loss. That is a real place where we can regain our capability to shape AI development. We also should be leading the discussion around AI and how it uses data. I know there is a bunch of work on that is coming up, but we should be doing a lot more. Tactically, I worry we focus too much on representation harms and not enough on material harms. And that is something I hope to see, I hope that we can address in future conferences. We are still very reliant on name and shame as a tactic for change, and that one is working a lot less well than it used to. And then third, please still keep giving companies like mine a research-backed hard time. We benefit from it. And a lot of the problems that are coming up right now in the AI industry, and they're very present in the AI industry, started because of the culture of impunity that exists in the startup community, particularly in my home area, the Bay Area. And I would encourage you all to look at the behavior of startups and change their incentive structures so that they're not incentivized to operate in legal or moral gray areas as much as they are right now.
Thank you. I think Yannis was going to come in on the
I just wanted to say that AI, of course, impacts everything, and ACM has been not very much involved in AI per se, but next year there is a preparation for an ACM AI summit where many of the AI plus X or 4X or by X will be addressed in various ways. Certainly AI and the loss of jobs will be one of the themes that will be addressed, and certainly this community should be involved both in preparations of some aspect of this, but also for you to be there and voice your opinions and so on. So it will be probably in the second half of 2026. Don't mark your date, but mark your semester, and at some point you'll have more details, and you should be there.
Thanks. So Sorelle, did you want to weigh in on this question?
Yeah, so I'm going to, I guess, disagree with Brent a little bit. No good panel without disagreement. So, I think sort of thinking back to, I'm going to lose this thing. Thinking back to sort of the history of fact, right? I think that when some of us who've been around a while started working on this broader research project, there was not recognition in society, by the broader public, certainly not by policymakers, that AI could cause bias. So I want to claim that we've won that fight, right? I think that there is now an understanding that these systems can be biased. And then I think the question is, what is the next fight, right? I agree that we should be involved in shaping that debate, especially around AI and workers, AI and copyright. I would also say effectiveness of AI in a wide variety of specific domains, transparency, right? I think these are all issues that we can and should still shape. I would also say that, in terms of AI bias, but also in terms of these other issues, I think that we still have obviously more work to do, and that some of that work has shifted from raising awareness to actual implementation, right? What does it look like to actually do the work? I hope that we can continue to really, influence the public and policy and industry on those questions.
Thanks. AJung, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, maybe I can build on the notion of implementation direction here, because I think we live in a time, maybe this is part success. We live in a time where we now have some regulation to reflect on. The kind of AI governance policies that are being proposed, the EU AI Act, for example, it's providing us with a little bit of a pressure for the responsible AI community to react to. For example, within the EU AI Act is the word audit. Okay, well, we've seen this word audit being scattered throughout many different papers, and we've got lots of paper tracks on that. But what should it actually mean? In reality, if you think about countries like Canada, because I'm from Canada, we are really taking a look at AI and policy as something where we have to figure out global interoperability. Okay, well, there are clear large players who are trying to govern AI and then be that kind of powerful force. And there are smaller actors that need to play nicely and build governance systems that actually can work across the global sphere. I think this is a kind of problem where responsible AI practitioners should be able to step in and say, okay, well, when one particular person says an AI ethics audit, we should be able to unpack how comprehensive should it be? Who should be able to do it? Should there be independence? Is there a particular bar, a standard that we should be able to set? I think we're starting to have these kind of productive discussions there. So I think that's the implementation or operationalization piece of where the regulatory pressures are coming in a positive way, so that by the time, maybe not too far in the future, we can see the responsible AI practitioner's role as one where we are becoming professionals, where we can be licensed to practice or audit a particular type of AI system or so on and so forth, to the degree that we can envision students in India getting licensed and auditing a particular model, and then that would be fully recognized by a company in the US or by policymakers or governing bodies in Canada. And that's, I think, the kind of opportunity and future we can kind of start to think about.
Brilliant. Would you like to?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here. I really have spent a lot of my career thinking about how money moves and how data moves. And the story with both is the same, that it is a fight between democracy versus domination, and that you will have powerful actors that seek to control the flow of money and control the flow of information in a society to gain power and use it. And I think we have sometimes seen how democracy won. In many ways, the creation of the original plumbing of the World Wide Web was a story about a state and a people investing to create an infrastructure that the world could build on top of. But I think what we are seeing today is really a market that is shaped by extremely financially and politically dominant tech conglomerates who are using the development of these technologies to advance their own economic interests, for which that comes into clash with our desire for technology to advance human progress. So the way to answer your question in terms of policy making, I really think that the US and Europe, and while there's some exceptions, are essentially closed for business on regulating AI in a meaningful way. The AI Act is a labyrinthine, cobweb of provisions that will be very difficult to enforce. And in the US and other jurisdictions, there is a sense that if you start regulating AI, we will lose some sort of geopolitical fight with our adversaries, or using the broad specter of China to say, don't touch anything. And I think the results of this are pretty dangerous in the sense that we will not be able to vindicate the rights of humans to be able to live their lives in ways that they control. So I think that we have a long list of things we need to do. One, we do have to make sure that we are thinking about digital sovereignty of people and of nations, and we need to be building technology that is an alternative in many ways, an alternative stack to what the tech monopolies are creating. And two, we really need to think about how are we going to use existing laws on the books to prosecute violations in an effective way that stops harm, rather than just ask trillion-dollar companies to pay a 20 million euro fine. We have created a system where following the law is essentially an option, and anytime you're caught, what you pay is the cost of doing business. So I think that we have a big challenge ahead of us, and creating the technology that is the alternate is going to have to be part of that solution.
Thank you. Brilliant. So that's a bit about these ongoing developments in AI policy. If we think about different sectors with specific actors who have taken kind of current visions of responsible AI, how could or should they be adapting those to meet this changing kind of world? So I'm going to ask AJung to kick us off on that one.
Yeah, maybe I can reflect on this question from more of a thinking about responsible AI practitioners as a particular actor in this domain, where I do think we have a particular responsibility to actually have a conversation with sector-specific individuals, go down to the weeds of the frontline workers who will be interfacing with the technology day in and day out, and actually take the time to listen and do the translation of all the different kinds of AI ethics-related work that we have been doing into practice for them, and be willing to listen to even conversations such as, I don't want any of this. I don't want any of this. I don't want to be adopting any of this within the sector. I don't want it in my office space or at work, at home. I think that is a valid point as well, but we need to do more of actually getting out there and conversing with real people, because I do agree that we cannot ignore the realities of where technology is at and the kind of dangers that it can pose. And we also need to take the time to respect that actually maybe one way that citizens are fighting is non-adoption. And that is maybe one of the problems that we can help solve.
So responsible AI is not AI. Yannis, do you have some comments?
Well, as one element that ACM has done and offered is the ACM Code of Ethics. And that's truly a jewel that was formed 30 years ago and was revised 7 years ago. And it really captures all the principles in a modern way that we as computing professionals or other professionals that are involved in computing should be following. And how many of you have read the ACM Code of Ethics? Okay, that's not bad.
That's pretty good.
Actually, that's pretty good. That's why I fell in love with facts. Yes, thank you. Thank you, because in most other conferences that are even more populous, you'll see fewer hands. So this is good. And one of the issues with the code that, by the way, has been adopted by many other sister societies at the national level, international level, and so on, is that it's the principles, but doesn't give you recipes on what to do in your everyday life. And there is an effort now, a presidential task force that is being formed, to come down to practical elements and examples of how do you use it when you're faced with issues in your industry or even in academia or in your job, and how do you promulgate that. So in next year, in a few years, all the hands go up, and not just because I've read it, but also I've practiced it. It's easier said than done, because often, as we discussed, the political or technological autocratic employers will tell you one thing, and the code will tell you something else. How do you balance this? It's not a black and white thing. So, but we hope to provide, to go away from the principles, and based on the principles to offer good advice and good practices, best practices on how to apply it. So stay tuned for that in order to address the issues that we have.
Thanks. Does anyone else want to add to that? Sorelle?
Yeah, so I wanted to pick up where Rohit left off on the previous question. So if we think about, if we accept the premise that AI policy is sort of, and regulation is sort of dead in the US at the national level and in the EU, then maybe the question is, where do we go from there? How can we still make positive change? And I think that there's a couple of concrete things that we can and should be doing now. So on the one hand, in the US, of course, there's still state-level possibility, assuming that a moratorium doesn't go into effect. To learn more about how you can get involved in that, I really encourage you to go to, there's a tutorial tomorrow being run by some folks who have been really involved in the state level and who are maybe looking for some more folks who might want to be involved. So if that sounds appealing, I encourage you to check that out. I would also say that, one of the things that we can do now as a community is start to set the standards and the norms, right? What do we think should be put in place? Even if there is, say no one at the federal level to put that into place right now, doing that work of developing those norms and setting those standards provides a strong intellectual basis potentially for a future administration to do something about it. But it also starts to set the norms for industry and hopefully put some pressure on industry now to do something about it. And then the third thing I would say is, we can and should still be raising the issue publicly, right? I encourage you to talk to journalists about your work, right? To tell them why it's important and to, help them frame things for the public so that they can understand the real dire consequences of our work.
Thanks.
So I think building on what Rohit and Sorelle said, certainly as an individual AI scientist within Microsoft, I'm empathetic to the concerns that you both have. But that also, it gives me a lens in terms of observing corporate behavior and realizing that there are other governors of corporate behavior that are outside policy, in particular the market. My company, Microsoft, we run on trust. We should be engaging in trustworthy behavior. It's a core part of our business. It's a key reason why banks around the world, governments around the world, entrust us with their data and entrust us with their business operations. And so we are incentivized to do stuff that highlights how trustworthy we are. It's one reason why Microsoft has done a pretty good job funding responsible AI research for the last decade or so, and I think we can do more, but that is an incentive structure. There are other companies that have different incentive structures, and I would encourage all of you to be thinking about, again, diversifying our tactical pool is just so critical right now. Thinking about the incentive structures that all of these different actors have, doing your research and thinking about how to make change through those different types of incentive structures, that we just have to get more creative than we've been in the past.
Yeah, I think it is so important to have individual level ethical conduct, to create norms around that. But I just want to be really open about the fact that I thought our introduction was spot on, which is that the dynamics of attacks on universities, defunding of a lot of core and basic research, as well as, let's just be honest, the volume of money that is being put into fund research is actually coming from those who have commercial interests. So we have to be very, very clear-eyed about this and understand that we can do all of that. And this same exact discussion happened in the 1990s, that, what if the World Wide Web is ultimately used to manipulate people? Or what if it's completely monetized through advertising? I mean, all of that happened. All of those harms occurred. And we're trying to think as if we're now in this new problem. We have dealt with this in our lifetimes. And we need to actually take a structuralist approach where in the debates of the early days of the internet, Bill Clinton's administration faced a question of whether to create a ad-free lane, a kind of a non-monetizable lane for digital progress, and they chose not to do that. There's a lot as written about this era. We should reflect on that, and we should reflect that the lack of action has led to enormous non-monetary harms, including to children, teens, and so many people across the world. So I hope that we are thinking more boldly about what is the different business model we want to create. And when this happened after the Great Depression, the thinking in the US was actually, let's stop trusting the largest and most powerful banks to intermediate currency in our country. We are going to create a new system of a central bank and deposit insurance that will keep people safe and that will keep the system safe. That was a totally different paradigm. And so I spent the last few days in Brussels and London thinking about the visions for Eurostack, a very different way of creating European digital sovereignty. How do we think about building things that is that alternative, I think, rather than just trying to regulate the existing system? We should regulate the existing system, but we face such serious challenges that we have to think bigger about how to overcome that.
Thank you.
Is sovereignty a good term or a bad term? Shall we go for it, or shall we be trying to avoid it in a more ecumenical, global coming together as humanity?
Yeah, well, I would love a world where we could, all touch each other and say, we're going to do all of this together. I don't know if we can do it when you have so many powerful firms who don't want that system. And personally, if I'm Europe, I don't know if I'm so comfortable really outsourcing everything to firms that are outside of my borders. Maybe that's good, but I think if we were in the US and this were the case, we would not just regulate it, we would build it. And I think we do have to make sure that people and nations do not have to depend on powerful forces that they have no real ability to control. We saw this during COVID. In the US and Europe, there were critical supplies that we could not get because of the way we have designed our economy. And I just think it's really important to think, what can we create that is open source? What can we create that is available to the world, but that does not centralize control in a boardroom in Silicon Valley?
Thank you. So this is an academic conference. Many of us here will consider ourselves scientists. And there's a vision of science that it's something that's pure pursuit of knowledge without any of this background stuff kind of interfering with that. So I wanted to ask you all how you think this, at this moment, these different elements are influencing that ideal of scientific principles, of kind of objectivity and rigor and so on. So would you be willing to speak to that point?
Yeah, no,
from the outside of science?
I do think that it is so, the pursuit of knowledge to contribute to humanity is a great human pursuit. But we should be realistic with ourselves that the types of knowledge that are pursued are downstream from where our states invest, where those with resources invest, and really what is the world that that is creating demand for that. So I think if we take the examples of pharmaceuticals, we do have a world that generally does not produce a lot of vaccines. It produces a lot of medications that you take every day because you can charge for it every day. And so a lot of the research that goes into molecular biology and pharmacology will reflect those incentives. So I think it is good to be aware of it, but also good to be thinking, how do you disrupt that? Because ultimately the creation of knowledge and the privatization of knowledge through trade secrets, copyrights, and patents has enormous effects on ultimately whether humans can survive many of the harms they face.
Thanks. Sorelle, do you want to weigh in on this question?
Yeah, so sort of taking the question from a slightly different perspective, I think it's also important to me that we as a community do our best to live up to scientific values in our own work, right? Thinking really carefully about what are the experimental principles that we're following when we conduct audits, such that they can stand up to scrutiny. More than a decade ago now, I started doing a series of work with some chemists and to try to accelerate the development of solar cell materials. And as part of that work, we were doing sort of prediction of outcomes of chemical experiments. And I, made some models, and they were like, okay, well, do you have access to that specific model that made this set of predictions, right? And, there were aspects of that as part of a machine learning pipeline, I would be like, oh, well, I could just train another one, right? But that is not what they wanted to know. They wanted to know, what is the specific model outcome? And one of the things that I really respected about working with them is that, as chemists, they had this very specific way of writing lab notebooks and making sure that they kept track of all of the details of the experiment such that it could be fully reproduced, right? They also asked me a very, I thought, wise but hard question, which was, okay, so your model does fairly well. What does it know that we don't, right? And it led us down a path of trying to really understand these models, right? Think about rigorous explainability techniques and try to make sure that those explainability techniques were themselves scientifically valid, right, and backed up in the lab. And so, I guess I would encourage all of us to try to, as much as we can, really follow good scientific principles in our own work to make sure that it really can stand up to the scrutiny that it deserves and which may be coming for it.
Mm-hmm. Would anyone else like to add to that?
Well, isn't this the time for the
openness,
scholarly communication? Yes. Unfortunately, if we look into not the fairness, accountability, transparency, trust issues in what others are doing, and we look at the scientific community, an alarmingly increasing percentage of us, in the general sense, are not behaving ethically in our scholarly communication practices. And it is amazing how much effort is spent by extremely smart people in trying to beat the system and trick the system, as opposed to spending that same time into true research, difficult problems, and to solve it. I won't go down the list of what people are inventing, and collusion networks and collusion rings is the dominant effort in the dominant way of tricking the system to increase your citations, to increase your publications, and so on, and even borderline criminal activities as well, extortion in some cases. But just to give you the simple thing, declaration of conflict of interests. In a very recent anecdotal and a very recent example that I heard of just yesterday, an ACM conference, submissions are made, 500 papers, only 20 of them did not have a failure of disclosing conflict of interest. So if you were to be strict, 480 submissions should be desk rejected, and you would have, well, a dinner, not a conference, with 20 people around it. And this is, especially this community, I don't know if it has any phenomenon, I'm not saying that, but this community whose topic is fairness and transparency and accountability, maybe you should study the scientific community and this practice and see how we can do it. And of course, with AI and all that, although our detection abilities are increasing dramatically if we have the data, but also the violation abilities are increased. So how do we do this? And at ACM, we are leading an effort, a multi-society effort, with the involvement of IEEE, AAAI, USNIC, SIAM, CRA also in the US, the Computing Research Association, leading a task force to see what we can do cross-computing. Because also when there's a silo, some people are doing some trick there. If they're caught, they go to the next society, they go to the next conference, and then they are white doves. Nothing is. So it's the data and it's the process. And in terms of the principles that Sorelle mentioned, let me also say another thing, that openness, despite some of its problems that it may have, is the way to go in terms of our everyday research life cycle. Open science is something that the scholarly communication community, the scientific community is pushing forward for 20 years and more. And now there are governmental mandates across the world that we should be doing in our publicly funded research, not Microsoft-funded research, that's a different thing, but publicly funded research, to have all the results open to society, as open as possible. In certain cases, things have to be closed. And part of it is open access, and ACM, starting January 1st, 2026, all research results, publications, and related research artifacts in the digital library will be openly available to everyone. The publishing people have to be paying, but everything around the world, even if you are in the most remote village and you have the scientists in you, you are in a small university somewhere in Global South or anywhere, you'll be able to access it free of charge, the entire ACM. And thank you for the... And let me say one thing. We're not sustainable. ACM currently is ready to lose $5 million because it costs to publish, and where ACM is investing from its reserves in order to follow this democratic philosophy, democratization of access to knowledge in order to achieve that.
Right.
It gets just a couple of reflections. They're all very interesting thoughts, a couple of reflections from the industry perspective. With respect to the quality of science, I think that's actually, as per what Sorelle was saying, you folks can influence some incentive structures there. The same sort of, we're starting to see some science quality problems emerge from industry labs. OpenAI, for instance, has had a lot of claims that have been walked back under scrutiny. You folks can be doing that scrutiny to keep us all honest, right? That you folks can be leading that charge. That's one point I think that's important for you all to understand in that direction. With respect to the open science, as we were discussing earlier, big fan, also very concerned about something. As soon as you open up that science, all of your papers get ingested in the model and are used to create profits for some of in some of the ways that, Rohit, you're concerned about, and you're not given any credit back for doing all that work. I get paid for it, so maybe it's okay for me. But for you folks, you're not getting any credit compensation, and you're not being asked for consent to use your papers in that way, which is, I think, a way that I think pretty clearly is going to backfire on the goals of open. Right. So what Yannis and I were talking about is I encourage professional societies to enable scientists like yourself, especially in groups, because that makes you more powerful, incredibly important with respect to how you have leverage in the form of your data over these systems, to say, hey, unless you can give me a citation every time you use my paper to respond to a prompt, maybe you can wait to train on this paper. Those are good incentives for companies like Microsoft. We want those incentives. Like that would help us make better products. So I would hope that professional societies like ACM, collectives of any type that have any control over data would begin to engage in those types of things. We have to be very careful right now when we think about open and who's going to benefit from it as a result.
And maybe adding to that, because we had an explicit session on public AI, open AI, and I think there was already a Hecht community contributing to actually rethinking this notion of openness, and my team has contributed a little bit of that as well. And hopefully, as ACM community, we can actually unpack it and be really thoughtful about these kinds of problems.
It's one thing to think about with respect to putting your papers on archive now, by the way. You got to sync it with archive, but to make sure if you can get the paper on archive and not on the ACM digital library, it doesn't matter. You got to have those controls synced across all the different platforms.
Interesting. So we hear a lot about the race for AI at the moment, whether that's race between countries, between industry players. So I guess the question is, are we in a race? Should we be in a race? What race should we be in? Does anyone want to kick us off? Maybe anyone want to start off?
Yeah, I think it is, for a host of reasons, just a moment where geopolitically the conversations between technology and just call it global hegemony, as you would say, as you mentioned, are just, it's on right now. There is a sense, and I think there has been a few moments that animated this, the DeepSeek, several other milestones have created a sense of where will different economic powers be if they do not win or make substantial progress on a race. I think it is very much animated by thinking about how the defense industrial base will navigate warfare in a much more advanced digital age. So I think in some ways it is natural for states to think about this from a security perspective, but you really worry about what the downstream effects of that are, because there will be a very deep temptation to succumb as peoples and democracies to the interests of those who have financial and commercial goals. So I think we are seeing this, Sorelle referenced it, a potentially live debate in the US of the US Congress in a tax bill putting in a provision to delete all state-based AI laws for 10 years. So it is obviously pushed by those who do not want to see any regulatory or other democratic accountability over what they are doing, and a general sense of who will be the winners and losers, and will it be so transformative that it can reorient the global order. So I think the way we have to internalize that is actually not just to watch it in fear, but to be able to think, what would we do to actually advance technology so that it serves the economy and the society without trickling down into a world where there's a sense that completely laissez-faire approach is what is going to lead to those developments. I would just argue that history teaches us that laissez-faire and no regulation is not actually what creates great advances in technology. We have seen this over and over again, that it is a joint venture between people and they're in public investments as well as what the private sector builds. And I think we should really think through that history as we chart a course forward. But it's certainly a major, major issue, and it is one where those in the global south and developing world really feel that they are going to be caught in the crossfire on it.
Would anyone else like to weigh in on that? Looks like
Maybe, yeah, if I can comment on it, I agree that there is a reality of an AI race in this kind of global context. But if I were to ask this audience, how many of you feel like you're the athletes running in this race? A few of you, okay. I think it should be everybody. I think we should be able to frame an AI race where everybody who is the FACT community can see ourselves as athletes, because the race is really about building good tech and actually making that much more measurable and visible, so that the race is not really about who has the largest compute clusters, who has the largest dollars invested in these kind of infrastructures, so that they can be in the race. Because I think the current race that we tend to talk about are the ones that only few are kind of the athletes in this race of a sort. And the majority of the globe, I think, is kind of feeling left out. Mm-hmm. And it really shouldn't be, because I think we are all, from everywhere. And our perspectives and our expertise should actually matter in this AI story. And I don't think we've really managed to frame the AI race as one that everybody can participate.
Thanks.
Just again, adding the industry perspective, I'd say we see the same thing between companies as we see between countries right now, and I think the same harms will result. I think we need this community's help, whether it's through collective action, alternatives to name and shame as the creative alternatives I want you folks to come up with, to snap us out of it. We're definitely in like a comically shambolic sometimes. If any of you have read Karen Howe's book, Karen Howe has been a longtime follower of research in this community. She wrote an excellent book called Empires of AI. You'll see she's made public some things that just will make you laugh in terms of how shambolic the accelerationist loop is between different companies right now, with rumors making people feel like they're forced to release things way before they're ready to release them, and these types of things. We need that help, and particularly I'm concerned about right now, OpenAI sets the agenda. And that means that everyone is sort of, even when it's not in the best long-term interests of other institutions, people are in some ways creating the world that OpenAI wants to create through this accelerationist loop. We need your help to snap us out of it, and we have policy, one hand behind our back with no policy, so we have to be creative on that front.
Thanks. Okay. Sorelle, do you want to weigh in on that?
I guess I would just quickly echo what AJung was saying, right? I think that, to the extent that we can start to, through, good ideas and joint initiatives, shift the narrative about what the race is about, I think that would be wonderful, right? There should be a race for good AI. We're in Greece, so there should be a race for democratic AI, right? What is that vision, and how do we, make that the goal?
And you and I were talking at lunch, right? Like, a race happens when people are really excited or really terrified. So how do you folks make people really excited or really terrified to create outcomes that are more pro-social than the baseline right now? That's one way to frame the challenge I'm trying to issue here. So,
thanks. So final question before we go to questions from the audience. If you could each give a short piece of advice to a student who is maybe doing a PhD or a postgrad in this field, what would be your advice for how they can move forward given the things we've been talking about in this conversation? Anyone want to kick us off?
I could start us.
Yep.
So I'm at a small liberal arts school in the United States, Haverford College. And I know that for those of you who are heading into the academic job market, you might be feeling a little bit of the stress, and I just wanted to let you all know that most small liberal arts schools are not having a hiring freeze. They're really excited to hire people in this exact area, right? I know from talking to my colleagues at other places. Their students are really interested in this, really want to do interdisciplinary, like liberal arts style work. Really want to hire you. So, please don't forget, I think sometimes in a research community, we sort of focus in on the R1 universities. There's lots of other places to do good work. So please keep an eye out for those jobs and apply to them. And I would similarly say, right, in this interdisciplinary space that we work in, we actually, I would say, have more options than sort of a traditional computer scientist, right? There's academia, but there's also policy, there's civil society. The knowledge that you have is really important to the world right now. And so, I encourage you to think broadly about the ways you can use it.
Thanks.
So I think this is a super important question because, as I said earlier, the energy and the talent in this room is the core reason we will be able to seize back the ability to set the agenda in AI, and the reason we did it in the past. I actually wrote down 4 things, if you don't mind, that I suggest. One is, I do a lot of hiring in my current role for my team and for other teams around the company, so I have some tips that might be of interest. One is prioritize companies whose selfish incentives align with the change you want to make. So I have this super dumb Venn diagram. I use it all over the place at Microsoft. Good for the world, good for Microsoft. There's an overlap. Microsoft employees are not going to be very good in their Microsoft capacity at doing stuff that's good for the world and not good for Microsoft, but we can sure as hell expect that anything big at that intersection, we should be making sure it gets done really well, right? So our natural incentives are aligned. You'll be much happier if you work at a company where you have a big intersection for yourself. Secondly, Responsible AI, in my view, is applied AI. You folks aren't munging around parameters to see what happens on a benchmark. You folks are hoping and creating real impact in the world. That's something that's appealing to industry. Third, many of you are methodological experts. Like audits are kind of how we evaluate all AI systems these days, right? So you can pitch yourself as methodological experts, even if there aren't explicit responsible AI roles for you. And then lastly, thinking not with my Microsoft hat on, but with my experience in the FACT community, that hat on, look around. These are your people. Most people in the FACT community are here because they understand harm and have felt harm in some way. Maybe their family has felt harm. Maybe they have experienced harm in a country they're from. Even if you're not super excited about making the exact same type of change, the people around you are your people. Support each other, and networks are incredibly important for taking the next step in any career. So please do be sure to support each other on that front.
I'm going to quote a hairstylist I met recently in Montreal. Her name is Juliana. She has access to more diverse types of people and their problems in her, hairstyles chair than I do. And some of the things that she shared with me really resonated with a life of a PhD student and what a PhD student might be going through in this very dramatic, tumultuous kind of a world. Because you might be looking at 5-6 years of your career working on a thing that you don't know if it's going to work out when there are very big, large, dramatic world events happening that you feel like you need to contribute to, and there may be many different battles you feel like you should be fighting, and you don't know what to do, and you feel like a bad person for not acting on it. I think that's the reality of the kind of world that we live in today, and what she told me is, when these things happen, I always say, hone in to your inner cockroach. Survive. There is a cockroach within you that is really a survivalist. And if you survive, and if you are true to yourself, and you find the one problem that you really care about, and you fight for that, then I think it'll be okay. Time will pass, and the world will change as well. Hopefully that is helpful, and helpful in the sense that sometimes the world can be a little bit depressing, but we will survive together.
I'm not sure how can I raise this visual of a cockroach inside. But
going into it.
There is no doubt that much of the computer software will be written by AI in the future, or with the tremendous help of AI. This means that will be fewer software jobs, or a lot more software will be written. In the latter case, things will proceed and nothing will change and everything will be abandoned and so on. In the former case, and of course these are two extremes, we don't know what will happen, but in the former case, then academic jobs in computing will be fewer because fewer computer scientists will have to be produced, or it won't be as attractive and so on. Main direction, computing plus X. AI plus X, and it could be the social sciences, but don't forget chemistry, don't forget physics, don't forget material sciences, don't forget museology. Anything is impacted by this technology that is being produced. And what happens at the seams is often the most interesting, the most exciting thing. And therefore, be very strong on the computing AI side, but also immerse yourself on the other side. And then you'll be free, and you'll have a great career, and the world will be wonderful, and you'll be doing exciting and amazing work. And if you follow an academic career, don't forget, as part of what you teach, as part of what you practice in your research, don't forget the code of ethics. Make it part of the foundations of how you do your work and what you teach. Not as an afterthought, not as a book on the side, but this, eventually, if it becomes part of the DNA of what we work on, will have a tremendous multiplicative impact in the future. And I agree with you that you said about, we have seen this in the past. We are living in the fourth industrial revolution, so-called fourth industrial revolution. And we are lucky because we can see what happened in the previous three. And yes, some jobs were impacted, yes, some fields disappeared, some people were impacted, but now, knowing how this happened, we can prevent it or minimize it or come up with measures to find the way so that the people that will be affected the most. And people in this room, and all of us, also industry, but also academia, are in the best place to think about these things and come up with the right solutions.
Thanks. You have care to pitch
I don't
for-
know if I'm well qualified to give advice to PhD students, but let me just say this. Really think about, no matter where your career takes you, just think about whether public service is part of that path. You know, in the agencies I led, we brought in scores and scores of those with deep technical expertise, and they were jumping in on major enforcement investigations, major policy making, and for those who came from different parts of academia and industry, many of them would confess that they felt that, you know, finally they were able to really have the impact they wanted. So just put some thought into that. But more broadly, I hope you all think about that throughout history, hoarding of knowledge was about depriving people power and control. It's why some societies did not teach certain groups to read. It is why knowledge is part of advancing democracy and humanity. So as you think about the creation of knowledge, make sure that it is also in service of that progress.
Thank you. Well, thanks to all the speakers. We have some time now for questions. I believe there are also some questions online, but maybe we'll start with the room. I can't see who put their, I can see a hand up here.
And there's one.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It should be in a better place.
Hi. As the use cases of AI proliferate, the problems proliferate as well. And it often feels now that working on responsible AI or AI harms is trying to boil the ocean, right? There's a million things out there. It also feels that really there's nobody in charge. So maybe the companies are dictating the pace, but really the companies also don't have an overall sort of coherent agenda on responsible and good AI. So sort of things are shaking out where the pieces are falling. In a context like that, there is temptation to retreat maybe into silos and abstraction. So I would like to ask the panel, following Brent's initial comment, to pick a concrete problem that you think should be prioritized in the broader responsible AI space and it should be of concern to this community, articulate the solution to that problem, and help us formulate a theory of change. How do we get from problem to solution, and what do the relevant players in the ecosystem need to do to get there?
In 20 seconds each. Does anyone want to take on that challenge?
Yeah. I can start. It's one that's very close to my heart. You know, I think we're in a pretty bad situation for all actors with respect to how the current AI systems use data without, you know, any credit, consent, or compensation. And I think there are all sorts of creative solutions that involve markets that can address those issues. Some are already manifest in startup form. It all starts with, if you wanted to build LLMs, but you had to ask to use the data, what would you do? So, you know, how do you actually put that in place? Well, there are a couple ways to put that in place. If there's enough collective action among the people who own data to withhold it in different ways, and make it available in the market, you know, that would happen. There's reputational, for companies like Microsoft, we'd be interested in doing that because, again, Microsoft runs on trust and we want a reliable and trustworthy data chain for our language models. So I think, you know, in that case, like, it's a big effort, but the path to solution is there. It's a matter of taking it.
Thanks. Sorelle?
One of the other sort of issues that Brent was also raising was about AI and the workplace and the economic incentives, right? This is a place where there has been a very small amount of research, largely by the companies, stating that AI will displace workers from a wide variety of fields. The way that that research has been conducted, if you dive into the papers, is largely that they ask their own models whether it is capable of doing the job in a wide variety of fields, right? In places where people have tried to, conduct like outside of company independent work to do this, they have also used the large language models in the same way, right? And so I guess, one of the things that I would love to see is actual research grounded in fact about whether or not AI is likely to displace jobs in a wide variety of industries. And the reason why I think that's important is because the market responds to that, right? The market is sort of preemptively assuming that some workers will be displaced, and I don't actually think we know if that's true.
So one thing I would add to that is, I definitely have seen that work, some of which is produced by my company. There is some work that does some human validation as well. I think it's important, though, to highlight that with respect to the Industrial Revolution comments and these types of things, those are super important empirical questions, and they really matter for the reasons that Sorelle mentioned. You don't want bosses preemptively laying off people, or people assuming that they're going to be laid off and underestimating their labor power as a result. That is a real problem. It is also important to recognize that, again, the current agenda setter is primarily OpenAI, and in core to their mission statement is they want to create AI systems that do, the exact phrasing is something along the lines of most economically valuable work. So whether we have to recognize that that actor is particularly empowered, and that is the world that they're seeking to create. So regardless of whether there is what the empirical outcomes say, we have to understand that is a key force in the industry right now.
One word, explainability. It's a big part of responsible AI. It's a very hard nut to crack. People are doing research on it, but we need a lot more. And we may need a combination of bottom-up AI, that is now the prevalent AI, and top-down AI in order to reach that point. So I hope that in the next few years we'll see a lot more research in this, and we'll be able to exercise AI more responsibly.
I'm going to go to another question. I think you're next.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the interesting panel and variety of perspectives. I just wanted to sort of make a comment or provocation. Apologies. There's a 90s hip-hop track by Jeru the Damager that says something along the lines of, "The race is on, but I won't compete." And I think that's a bit of a healthier sort of disposition to this AI race right now. I think our responsibility as a community is not to get sucked into these toxic geopolitical forces, but rather to stand up for the public values that I think animate us and are the title of this conference. And I think it's not so much our responsibility to try to keep up with those who can run much faster than we can, but to slow down and think about building the systems that we actually want. So like systems that solve real problems rather than like generalist AI, jack of all trades, master of none type of systems. Yeah, so that's not really a question.
Well,
Thank you.
I mean, I would just react and say, amen. But we should also be open with the fact that that requires an enormous amount of personal courage, and often being the lone person to dissent. And also the realistic part that there is a need for resources to be able to support people who want to do the right thing. And I think that's why I'm more of a skeptic of individualizing the responsibility and needing there to be different systems where people can build, rather than what is being commercialized today. So while I appreciate the need for courage, it also has a huge requirement for collective action as well.
Yeah, so Thanks for that response. So what do you think is maybe the role of these bigger actors in supporting this kind of more public values-oriented work?
Of the bigger actors?
Yeah, the ones that are sort of pulling us into the race.
You know, I so appreciate that each of them are going to have their own brands, and they will use that brand for their business and attracting talent. I think we need to think of the large firms as actually downstream, and I don't think we should be in the business of sort of hoping they'll do something that is right. I have this bias, but I think it requires laws and enforcement to create those incentives. I was going to answer to the previous questioner about theories of change, which is that each culture and country has legal tools that exist today that may provide to be very powerful. In some jurisdictions, it may be trade secrets law. You know, in the US, there is just a ruling that Anthropic is able to get around copyright law because of the US doctrine on fair use. If you think that through, other companies can maybe infringe on Anthropic using the same doctrine to be able to expropriate. So where is this all going? Yeah. We need to think about the laws that we have in individual countries and use them effectively to reach the incentive structure that we want. None of it, of course, is easy, but it requires creativity and putting those with technical knowledge and those who work on the ground in advocacy to do it together.
Thanks. So we are about to encroach on coffee time, but maybe if we just have one more question. So let's get someone over here.
Hey, I'm a young researcher. I have this, we are talking about sovereignty, we are talking about warfare, global race. My question is that, essentially, why are we
Can you speak a little bit closer to the mic?
Why are we talking about rules and ethics on a geopolitical boundary location? Like, so we're talking about European rules and ethics, but rather not push for ethics and rules on a universal level? Because, if you think about it, a lot of a universal code of ethics might be able to solve a lot of these problems that we have been discussing, thinking of like problems related to the awful cycle, the startup cultures, and the sovereignty. Like it can actually provide a process to create like a digital stack for each country or like a continental digital stack, while also protecting the global south, which might not have the capabilities, like at the same time leveling the race that we were talking about. So if the panel has comments on that, like pushing for a universal code of ethics rather than a code of ethics on laws for countries and continents.
Thanks.
If I'm briefly, just one point. 2 years ago, the UN General Secretary formed a high-level committee of about 30 people to look into AI governance for all and globally. And in last September, the document that is called, I think, AI Governance for All or Global or something like this, I don't remember the title, was launched and was presented to the UN General Assembly, and it was unanimously accepted. It had 6 main areas where it talked about governance and actions and so on for the globe. 5 were accepted, and 1 was not accepted, which had to do about data, because then data sovereignty came in and not every country wanted to follow what the recommendations were. So there's still work to be done. But at least to the extent that I know, this is a global document about what we should do about governing AI with all the ethical implications and underpinnings in it.
If anyone has a very short additional response.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that's a great question and highlights one of the, I mentioned name and shame not working as well. An alternative we talked about a lot is collective action. Trivially speaking, if all of us stopped doing the current AI work we're doing, it wouldn't continue. We have a lot of power in our community, in our community of practice. So I very much agree that would have to be global, but it's possible.
I agree. It would, of course, be better as universal. But right now, the universal rules will overwhelmingly be shaped by the companies operating universally. And I think having a more human-centered approach to that is a challenge, and one that we just have to aspire for. We also cannot deny that there has been technologies, the scientific, chemistry, biology, that knowledge was given to the whole world for their use. And I think we need to be more in that mindset of what do we create for the universal good, rather than just for commercialization.
Thank you. Well, that's a fantastic place to end. I'd just like to have a round of applause for these fantastic speakers.
This is great.